Are you worried about staying compliant with your nonprofit? Here are 3 areas you cannot afford to ignore if you want to stay compliant and you don't want to get in trouble. The 3 areas I'm going to talk about today are related to regulations at the state level, because whether you realize it or not, nonprofits are mostly regulated by states. The IRS does pay attention to tax-exempt nonprofits, but most of the rules and regulations that pertain to nonprofits typically come from the states where you're operating in or the state that you incorporated in. I'm Tiffany. I created Boss on a Budget to teach people how to start their nonprofits and how to raise money from the ground up. So let's go. Number 1, you got to pay attention to the law. In every state, there's some kind of nonprofit law or nonprofit code. And usually within that law or within that code, they have things about how nonprofits are supposed to operate. So usually they'll have things about the number of required meetings. They'll have things about the number of board members you're required to have, like the minimum number. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 3. Sometimes if they require a committee or if they require something of your board, then they'll have it written in state law. Sometimes they'll talk about the quorum, which is basically the number of people that need to be present in a meeting in order to conduct official business. That's a really important number for you to know and for you to have in your bylaws. And a lot of times the nonprofit law or the code will talk about that and will reference what they believe a quorum is. In most circumstances that I've seen in working with people starting their nonprofits, as long as you don't contradict state law, then you can put whatever you want to put in your bylaws, right? Like as long as it doesn't directly oppose or is directly opposite to what state law says, then typically you can go by what's in your bylaws. So for example, if the minimum number of board members is 3 in your state, but you want the minimum to be 5, as long as it doesn't contradict the original minimum, which is 3, then you're good, right? So that's typically what you're going to find. You're going to find possibly term limits for board members, the number of terms they're allowed to have. Particularly when it comes to that, you want to know the law so that you are following the law in case your decisions that you make are challenged. You're fine to be following the law. If you're looking for your nonprofit state law, then just Google nonprofit code or nonprofit law in the name of your state. And typically that will come up. Another way or another hack is if you go to your Secretary of State's office and you look at the forms for, starting a business entity or creating a name or something like that, they will usually footnote or link to the law that references the rules that relate to whatever you're doing or whatever you're applying to. So when you hit that link, you can see the name of the law, the number, all that kind of stuff, so you can do more research. Most state law is online. I would venture to say all, but I don't like saying all if I don't know for sure. But most state law is online. You can look it up. You can Google it. You can find it in multiple places. So it really is on you to do the research to know what your state law requires. And here's the thing, don't be scared. Most times it's not a lot. It doesn't take a lot of time to read through all the statutes. Second thing you need to know about are the agencies that provide the regulations or that govern your organization. And the top 3 that you're typically going to engage with is the Secretary of State, the Attorney General's office, and the Department of Revenue, or sometimes it's called the Department of Taxes. In my state, it's like Department of Assessment Taxes or something, right? So something along those lines. They don't always have the same names from state to state. Your Secretary of State's office really deals with starting your business, and you typically have to submit annual reports to them, check to see if you're in good standing, those kind of things. That's typically what a Secretary of State's office is. I have found that when you call them or when you go on their website, they are typically some of the most helpful people or helpful agencies at a state. They usually have how-to guides, they usually have PDFs, they usually have instructions for all of their paperwork and their forms. So really dig in, learn the Secretary of State's website and learn how to navigate it and how to find the forms. Most times they're going to require you to set up an online account, and you can just submit your paperwork online. So I would advise you learn that process, set up an account to make your life easier. With the Attorney General's office, it's not always, but most times, they regulate charitable solicitation. They regulate how you collect money. They keep a list of organizations that are approved to ask for or solicit donations in the state. So you need to read the documentation, because a lot of times it gets a little complicated, because sometimes if you have to apply to ask for donations, you may be exempt, right? And you may be exempt if you don't raise this much money, or if you're this kind of organization, right? And you may have to pay a fee, but it may be a sliding scale fee. So just dig into whatever they have to say about charitable solicitation. And also you're gonna have to pay a fee. So you need to learn that website as well. And with the Department of Revenue, so if you are selling items, or if you want to be exempt from paying sales tax, because let me just say, just because you have 501c3 status doesn't mean you automatically don't have to pay sales tax. Like, you still have to pay sales tax in some states, or you gotta ask to be exempt from paying that. Just know, y'all, there's a difference between 501c3 status, which is federally exempt income tax, and state tax, which is what the state puts on goods or services in the state, and they require you to submit that tax to the state. Those are two different things that a lot of people don't understand. I did a video on this, so check it out if you need help understanding it. No judgment if you don't. I won't know. Just click the video. But just know there's a difference. So if you are trying to get exempt from paying sales tax, then usually you would go through your Department of Tax, Revenue, Assessments, whatever. Sometimes they want you to set up an account, especially if you're going to have employees. So you're going to have some kind of tax account, and you're going to probably have some account for unemployment insurance and all those kind of things for submitting payroll tax and stuff like that. So once you start getting deeper into it and you start paying people and all that kind of stuff, you definitely need to get familiar with the Department of Taxes or Revenue. And then finally, you need to understand fundraising. I referenced this when I talked about the Attorney General's office, but you really need to understand the rules around fundraising. So are you allowed to solicit for donations in your state? Do you have to apply first? If you're not raising a certain amount of money, are you exempt? Do you have to apply at all? Because some states, a very small number of states, you don't have to apply. Do you have to apply if you're asking for money in another state? The answer is yes, probably. So you need to know. You need to do your research around that. Some states require you to have certain disclosures on donor letters or on certain documents or receipt letters and things like that. So you got to look up and see what your state requires when it comes to fundraising. As I said before, there's typically a fee. If you have to register, there's probably a fee, and it's a regular fee. It's something you have to pay over and over again. And in most circumstances, when you are reapplying, you have to supply documentation or information. They want to know, usually, about your finances. They want to see financial statements. So just be prepared for that, to provide financial information, and make sure you're capturing that information and it's organized in a way so it's easy to submit back to whatever agency you have to work with. Now, I said I was going to be talking mainly about the state in this video, but I just want to say also that you have to submit your 990 form every year to the IRS, which is the federal government, which is different from the state. And you have to do it every year, even if you don't raise any money. Because if you don't, they're going to take away your status automatically if you don't file for 3 years straight. You should be prepared to do something with your financial information. If you're not raising a lot of money, then the amount of information you have to give to the IRS is limited. But that doesn't mean with the state that they don't want to see it. They may want you to break it down, even though you're not required to do that for the IRS. So you just got to be prepared and understand what kind of information you should know about where your money has gone and where the money came from. If you have other questions about compliance, put them in the comments below, because that will give me ideas for other videos. You can always find me at bossonabudget.com, where I share information and tips for starting your nonprofit. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.